Yeah. So basically, when I got out of college, I had a whole bunch of credit card debt, and I was hiding it from my family because, being low income, being first gen, like you don't want any just to be the disappointment. So I didn't tell anybody, and I just started like trying to figure it out on my own. And I started reading books and watching videos and podcasts and YouTube and all this stuff. And that's when I kind of got on my own financial journey to pay off all the debt. And when I finally paid off the debt, I was like, all right, I feel like it's ridiculous that I never learned this in school. Like everybody needs to know this. So I took to YouTube and I started Miss Be Helpful, which is the YouTube platform where I started to share just my story, like, hey guys, I'm saving half of my income. I just paid off 20 grand in credit cards. Like if I could do this stuff and I'm like a regular degular girl from Brooklyn with no financial training or business expertise or anything, then you could do it too. And then after like a year or two of posting videos consistently, NextGen Personal Finance and a bunch of others, but this particular company reached out to me and said, hey, we really love what you're doing on YouTube. Can you come on our podcast? Can you connect with us? Can you, just sort of become part of the work that they were doing? And then eventually that led to a full-time position opening up. And the founder reached out to me and said, you're perfect for this job. I want you. And I was like, no. I want to be a YouTuber. I want to do my own thing. And he's like, no, listen, this is really perfectly in line with all the stuff that you're already doing. If you just hear our pitch, I think you will love the role. And that's exactly what happened. I heard their pitch and I was like, I love this role. This is a perfect job for me. So kind of started with YouTube, me kind of doing my own thing, trying to figure it out. And then actually led to like a really cool, solid career path that's really rewarding because it lines up perfectly with my personal passions anyway.
That's super cool. And you definitely are enmeshed in the FI community, because I saw like on the doc you sent, your current goal is to hit Coast FI. So,
That's my goal.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. We actually just aired the Fire documentary, and you all are in it, which was really cool, with all of our teachers at NextGen Personal Finance. We have like 30,000 teacher community of teachers that are learning personal finance themselves so they can teach it. And so we had a conference and we did like a live watch party of the documentary, and we stopped for questions and things like that. So yeah, I'm definitely, cool. Reading and all up in, I'm not like hardcore Fire, but definitely intrigued by it, inspired by it. And nice. Coast Fire is definitely on my list. Yeah.
That's cool.
All right. Why do you think, a lot of people have low-level credit card debt? Why do you feel that as a college grad, coming out, entering adulthood, you just got buried in it? Like, why were you struggling against this, and why? What sourced that? What caused that? How did you land there?
I think the biggest reason is because I had a total lack of understanding of what exactly this arrangement was between me and the bank that issued my credit card. Like, I didn't understand that this was a loan that I was taking out, and that not only was I responsible for paying back what I borrowed, like my actual spending and what I swiped on the credit card, but also the interest that would be accruing every single time that I did not pay the statement balance in full by the statement due date. Like, those things sound so basic to somebody who actually understands the basics of financial literacy and credit. That was a foreign language to me. It would have basically been like speaking Chinese to me, and I don't speak Chinese. So I really didn't understand how it was compounding. And the thing about credit card interest, it's not like a personal loan or a student loan. My average interest rate across my different student credit cards was like 27%. So compound 27% on a couple $1,000s for 4 years of college, making minimum payments, and that's how you end up with $15,000 to $20,000 of debt.
All right, everyone. Today we're going to be speaking with Yanely, also known as Miss Be Helpful to our following on YouTube. Also now working with NextGen Personal Finance, promoting financial literacy in classrooms across the country. It's going to be a fantastic conversation. I think as a result of this, you're going to see why, drawing from that inflection point that crossroads that she hit, digging her way out of incredible credit card debt. I didn't have these money conversations. You're going to understand how powerful this conversation is and why it's so necessary that we see financial literacy spread across the country and express across the world. To help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan. I am doing quite well. Yeah, I am really fascinated by Yaneli's story. It's going to be an interesting look at her path, right? So she grew up in a low-income household in Brooklyn, New York, and then attended Brown University, which is one of the elite universities in the world, not less the US. And I'm curious how maybe this clash of cultures might have led to her getting into this credit card debt. So I'm fascinated by that. And just her story of wanting to educate people, of saying, hey, I started from just this one $1,500 credit card limit that then spiraled. And now, how can I help people avoid that situation altogether? So, with that, Yaneli, welcome to Choose FI.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I have seen y'all everywhere. I'm like, I can't believe I was invited to be on the show.
Well, we are glad you are here.
Exactly. Let's we're gonna go before the credit card debt. So Brad was mentioning you grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and you said there was a lack of money lessons. Like, how did that manifest? What was your relationship with money? What did you see? Your parents, how did you see them interacting with money? What were the money lessons that you took with you as you went to Brown University? Just talk us through a little bit of that storyline.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing that I remember was there was not a lot of money, so there really wasn't a lot to talk about when it comes to money because there wasn't a lot of money. And the biggest thing for me was when we did happen to be talking about money, or there was sort of like this something was going on with money that created tension in the house. It was always negative, and it was always because my father didn't have enough money to cover everything that he needed to cover: rent, the bills, the food, school bills, school supplies, anything like that. And so usually that's when tension got really high, things were really bad. And then if there was ever a positive time where we kind of like thought money was like we were in a good place with money, it was probably because my dad hit a lotto number that paid him a little something, or maybe he went to Atlantic City and hit like a little jackpot, a couple $100, and he was in a good mood and he maybe like gave me 10 or $20. And I was like, oh yeah, like I'm rich, So I think those are like my memories of early childhood with like, very small amounts of money. But I do think that one of the things that my father did instill in me, which is really good, is he always thought like, you never want to have like a loan or a debt to somebody else. Like if you owe a person money, you want to always come out clear. You want to clear that debt. You want to make that whole, right? So like if you borrow money from your friend, from your cousin, from your uncle, you always pay them back. And the funny thing is for me, that did not transfer over to institutional lending and institutional borrowing. Like I thought of it like very literal. Like if I borrow money from my sister, I must pay her back. And I never transferred that over to if I borrow money from a bank, I must pay them back. So it's really interesting how everything was very literal in my mind growing up, and I didn't really have the connections between the real world that I was living in and like the financial systems that we operate within. So for me, that didn't happen till much later. And maybe people might laugh at that, at the thought of that, but I think that's actually very common in neighborhoods like mine, and probably even different communities all across the country, because people just don't often make connections between real world lived experiences and what's happening, in terms of like applying that to what's happening in the larger system.
Yeah, I certainly do not think that's anything to laugh about. I think that is quite common, right? There's no financial literacy education. And I mean, you get like you did at 18, 19 years old, you get that first credit card and it's wow, I've never had that much money in my entire life, right?
Exactly.
And what do
Exactly.
you do? You go
You know,
and spend in many cases, right?
Yeah. And the funny thing is, in my mind, so the reason why I got a credit card at 18 was because I just didn't realize how expensive school was going to be. When I got accepted to Brown University, amazingly, it came as a blessing to me that it came with a scholarship. So I actually got a full scholarship to Brown University. That, in my mind, that meant that I wasn't going to have to pay for anything. I mean, I'm going to go to school for free. For 4 years, I'm going to be there and I'm never going to have to pay for anything. That's the message that I got. But when I hit campus, I realized, oh my goodness, how am I going to pay for these textbooks? I need a laptop. I need to buy things for my science lab class or for my art class that requires all these expensive art supplies. A canvas and paint and brushes is not cheap, you guys. So, like all these classes I was taking, and ended up coming up with like extra costs that wasn't in the tuition and the room and board and the standard like meal plan. Those things I had covered, but all the other things that came up, I didn't account for. So I ended up getting a credit card. And the funny thing is, the story that I told myself, the narrative that I told myself was, I'm going to do this myself. I'm not going to borrow money from somebody because my dad taught me not to do that. So instead of calling my family and calling home and saying, can you guys send me a couple $100 for my textbooks? I'm going to figure it out on my own. I'm going to get a credit
Mm.
card that has my name on it and I'm going to pay for it so that I don't have to borrow money from someone. So it's just so funny. The lack of real true understanding of financial literacy can really lead you astray, and in a way that's so terrible because you think you're on the right path And mind you, you're doing everything wrong, or at least not necessarily wrong, but like in a way that you think is right, and you're actually completely mistaken.
What's fascinating about what you just said is, with the benefit of hindsight, you're saying, yeah, that was kind of, financially irresponsible. But at the time, through the lens of where you were on your journey, this is you being resourceful. You're not supposed to borrow money from people. You're looking at the tools you have available and say, look at me. I'm an adult. I can get a credit card. I can afford the payments. This is just what adults do. Like, what's the downside? This is the path. And
Exactly.
that's really interesting. So can you give have you shared like what was the because you said you had 4 years of managing the credit card payments, working at a minimum wage job, being able to afford the payments, but just over a period of 4 years. So kind of like cash flowing your life on a payment basis. What was the credit card debt that you came out with after graduation?
Yeah, so I always paid the minimum payment, which at the very least that saved me because it kept my credit in good standing in terms of payment history. I never had a late payment or a missed payment in my life. So that's amazing, right? And everybody who's familiar with the credit factors knows that payment history is the most important category of all. So it's really important to keep that nice and clean. But the problem with me was the next category, which is the next biggest, was utilization. And I kept on getting really close to maxing out my credit cards. And then I would just kind of send what I could to lower my balance. But every month I always sent like, 35, 40, $55, whatever that minimum balance due was. And my first credit card was a credit limit of $1,500. And then the next one was like 5,000. The next one was like 7,000. And it just sort of kept extending more and more credit to me, which in hindsight is like, how the heck does that even make sense, right? This kid maxed out her $1,500 credit card. Let's give her a $5,000 one. But that's what happened. I kept applying for another credit card and I kept getting accepted with higher limits. And that helped me at the time, to finance things that I needed, but also things that I wanted. That's when it got out of control, right? Because I went from getting my laptop and getting my textbooks and getting science lab supplies to getting a new dress for every party, new shoes for every event, and getting Starbucks and getting movie tickets and concert tickets. And that's the stuff that I just kept piling on so that I could, keep up with this lifestyle. Being at Brown, you're around a bunch of rich kids. That's just what it is. And coming from a very, very, very poor community, I was just not used to that. And I felt like the only way that I could fit in was to, keep up with whatever everybody around me was doing. So just doing that, keeping up with all that lifestyle stuff, I ended up having about a little bit over $15,000 on the credit cards by the time I was a senior. And then I still kept making minimum payments for like a year or two after that. And it got really close to 20 grand. But I had one small student loan that I took out to actually go study abroad because my scholarship did not cover that. And so off campus, studies, I went to France. It was really fun, but I had to pay out of pocket. I ended up taking out a $5,000 loan. So altogether, the debt was just above $21,000, with a large bulk of that being just credit card debt.
Wow. I wanted to ask about those first couple months on campus in Providence, I guess. I've read a lot of studies how there was a push by many of the elite universities to extend, acceptance and in your case, scholarships to lower income students, but maybe surprisingly to them or inexplicably, the graduation rates are significantly lower than I think they first expected. And I think,
Yep.
I mentioned this in the setup. I think I used the phrase clash of cultures. I probably meant culture shock. And I'm curious, like, if you could if you could help somebody who is in your spot, now, and they're getting started, like, how would you help those low income students succeed at really any college, not less, an elite university? Like, what should they be armed with to succeed, and that they're just not even expecting, I guess.
The biggest thing is what you said. It's the culture shock. And the biggest thing about culture that I think people tend to ignore, besides the food you eat and the music you listen to, it's the words that you speak. It's how you talk. Literally, the expressions, the idioms, your mannerisms, all that stuff is really in the root of the culture that you were brought up in. And for me, I was brought up in New York City, vibrant Brooklyn, Dominican American community, mostly other Caribbean immigrants as well. So we're talking about Jamaican, Trinidadian, Bayesian, Haitian, a community of Caribbean immigrants, both Latino and also Black Caribbeans. And so when we think about that culture, generalize, I'm going to generalize here. Of course, I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm part of the culture, and I can say we're loud, we're boisterous, we like to dance, we like to play loud music, we like to party, we eat a lot. And the expressions and the idioms that are commonly used in American English are somewhat foreign to us unless we've been here for more than one or two generations. And so when I got to campus, that was the immediate thing that stuck out to me, was like, I don't fit here because people don't talk like me. I don't talk like these people. I don't act like these people. I'm an outcast in every way. As soon as I open my mouth, and even before I open my mouth, like I dress differently, like I walk differently, or I use my hands when I talk. Like people look at me and it's like, oh, she's funny, she's interesting. Where's she from? Versus me blending in with everybody. So that was, for me, was the biggest culture shock, was just like people using manner, like expressions of, turn of phrase that I just never heard of. I was like, what is that? And I kept finding myself asking myself, what is that? What does that mean? What does that mean? And it just made me feel really, really dumb. Whereas when I was in high school, I was one of the top performing kids in my class. I felt really, really smart. So what does that do to your ego, to your conscience, where you go from feeling like you are top of the pack to feeling like you are in the total wrong path because you just can't even keep up? And so that's, I think, psychologically what starts to get to low income students when they finally get to a prestigious institution and they're around this environment that just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like home. And the only thing that helped me was surrounding myself by peers that also difficulties with this transition and also experience the same or similar culture shock. And so we could talk about it together. And I would be like, do you know what this means? Today I was talking to someone and they said to me, that's not in my wheelhouse. And I literally just looked at it like, what's a wheelhouse? Like, I don't know what that is. And so in my mind, I'm picturing like a wagon. I'm like, what is going on? And so I had to like constantly look these things up and just try to keep up. But so I think the biggest thing that I would do for a low income student now that's gonna, do this soon, is exposure as early on as possible to the rigorous language, rigorous vocabulary, just the rigor that is going to be expected of you and that you're going to be surrounded by, in terms of the vocabulary and the word choice that's being used when people are speaking, the writing that you're going to have to read, the writing that you're going to have to produce. Like, I had to work my butt off to write well enough to get a B. And I'm an A student, coming to this school. I had to go to the writing center constantly to get them to like mark up my papers. And then I, attempted 3 or 4 times before I thought I could submit it. And that kind of work that you're going to have to put in, it's kind of scary to think, right? Because you think you're going to get there and you deserve to be there just like everyone else, but you see that you have to work 5 times harder than the kids around you to get the same grades as them. So I think what happens is, oftentimes we're not preparing the students with that understanding before they get there. So when they get there, it's a total shock. They hate it and they go running back home. Which I almost did. Thank goodness for my mom, who was like, you're not coming home. You better figure it out. you know?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thank you for that answer. That was really, really, really interesting and thoughtful. And I'm curious also then, kind of moving back into the financial aspect. How much of your 15,000, or ultimately, 15 to 20,000, do you think was because of peer pressure? And the answer might be zero, but like how much do you think was peer pressure, like just being around all these other wealthy people who are going out to eat all the time or doing this and doing that? Like, talk me through that.
I would, if I had to put an estimate on it, I mean, obviously we're talking about just me, off the top of my head, going back to think about all the things I spent money on, but I would say probably 2/3. I think legitimately I needed several $1,000s to make it through, to pay for my expensive books, laptops, lab fees, art supplies. I mean, these are things that I just needed to pay. And so for sure, those things, of course, we're talking about travel as well is not covered. So when I had to take the train or the bus back and forth from New York City to Providence for Thanksgiving and for Christmas and those types of things, that kind of stuff adds up as well. So there's definitely a need for a couple $1,000s per year. That being said, maybe $2,000 per year came from me actually needing to spend that money, and probably even a little less, versus me going out and shopping and buying food. And especially when it was like friends' birthdays. Everybody's like, oh, we're going to dinner, or we're going to dinner and then a movie, and and then we're doing this. And there was this constant pressure to participate in all of your friends' birthday events, because if you did one, you couldn't skip the other, because then that's signaling that that one friend is a better friend to you than this other friend. And if you're in a group of five friends, that means you got four birthdays that you have to, so birthdays was a huge thing. And then social events and social gatherings that had like cover that you had to pay to get in. Those were also things where I would just put it on. I would use cash. Then whatever I needed that I would normally spend my cash for, I would put on my credit card, because I was reserving my cash for paying for parties and drinks. And so, I definitely think most of it what did come from peer pressure. But the funny thing is, it wasn't really spoken peer pressure. I never felt like I had somebody like verbally putting pressure on me that I needed to spend. It was more so this environment that, it's sort of like in the air, that you're expected to wear Uggs when you're on campus, that you're expected to have a name brand tote bag for your name brand laptop. Like these are nobody ever really said you're not cool if you're not wearing Uggs. But I was definitely getting the sense that I wouldn't be considered cool if I didn't have it, if I didn't have Uggs, if that makes sense.
No, it doesn't. I'm thinking about those birthday outings, right? That's $100+ dollars compounded annually at 27%, right?
There
The
you
wrong
go.
way. We think of compounding interest in the right way, but when you're talking credit cards, that's a $300-400 outing after all said and done.
And the funny thing is, I keep in touch with maybe two or three of the like 12 friends that I felt pressured to spend on their birthdays. I love them all, but who actually still texts me on a monthly or weekly basis? Maybe three of them.
I'm asking you this question, not so much that you, there may not be a perfect answer to this question, but with you looking back with regret at the credit card debt you came out with and saying, I wish I knew then what I know now. And and parallel to that, or simultaneously, you're speaking to a younger generation or people who are coming behind you that want to do better. They're benefiting from your hindsight and the information that you have. What is the best practices here? Because I do think that in many cultures, many communities across the country, almost all, college is still perceived as the way out. It's the gatekeeper to a better life. If you get through college, you graduate college, and there's some pushback on this because a lot of students are coming out with such significant student loan debt that they're getting, they're just trying to get back to a net worth of zero in their 30s and 40s. So there's some legitimate pushback on that. But in general, the perception in many communities and cultures is that college is the gatekeeper for a better life. But the kids are being ill prepared for that early version of adulting, and they're feeling the exact same peer pressure, and they're not really knowing how to navigate that. So for someone from a lower income community that did, because they were just crushing it, they were that top of the class, they got the full scholarship, they got into school, what would be in your mind looking back, what is the best practices? Is there any tips or strategies, any resources for those individuals that will not make this easy, but make it easier?
Yeah. I mean, I think for sure the thing that comes to mind is that there is a certain level of grit that you need to be able to have to survive in an environment that is not your comfort zone. You got to have grit. If you're not a gritty person, you're going to give up. You're going to give up 2 weeks in when things just feel really weird and uncomfortable and awkward. And after a couple of really weird interactions, you're going to just, yeah, you're going to, go running for the bus home. And so I think that you have to really be real with yourself and have a really high level of self awareness. Do you have the grit that it takes in an academic and social sense? So academically gritty, like your grades are where they need to be. We're talking top, 10% of your class. And on top of that, you have the social grit to withstand a lot of the pressures and also survive in an environment that really doesn't look or feel anything like your home environment did. And if you really can, if you feel like you can pass that test, then that is probably the type of student that is going to thrive in an environment that, most people like them probably don't. And so I feel like for me, I did have that. I had that grit. And I'm glad that was instilled in me early, that like adversity came my way and I was able to really learn how to tackle it in a way that I could still balance my mental health and my sanity and all that kind of stuff. And I think the problem is not enough people are talking about grit. So just because you have straight A's and just because you can qualify for all the scholarships in the book doesn't mean that you have what it takes to survive at one of these elite institutions, or even maybe like a regular like a college that maybe isn't considered prestigious or elite, but can get you a really solid degree. So I think for me, we have to be talking to kids about that and getting them to self-assess, and figure out, where am I on the grid scale? Because if I'm low on the grid scale, then I should probably do trade school, because it's quicker and can lead to a pretty decent, income pretty quickly, versus something like 4 years of college, and then depending on what you want to do after that, maybe will require 2 years or some extended form of study. And so I really do think we need to be talking more about that for sure.
Yeah, agreed. Grid is enormously important. And you are then at this inflection point, right? So you're graduating college, you have this significant debt, you're making maybe these easy choices, right? And that's probably not the gritty person that you are today, or that you had hoped you would be in that situation, but you get to an inflection point, right?
That's
And
right. Right.
and you had this choice between continuing this easy lifestyle of credit, or, as you say, breaking the cycle of poverty. And I'd love to
Yeah.
hear, like, what changed? Was there a flip that
Yeah.
switched? Was like, what was it that caused you to change?
I think it's literally those words you just said. To me, I never thought about it until I got back home, that there was a cycle of poverty, that this was actually cyclical, and that it was being passed down from generation to generation, unless somebody pointed it out to me. And so the funny thing is, once I started reading books about money, I noticed that the books were describing what I was living. The books that were describing cycle of poverty and generational poverty, I was like, wait, my grandparents grew up in rural Dominican Republic, born and raised, then died there, and they were poor their whole lives. My parents grew up poor, came to America, depended on government assistance, are still, pretty low income. I mean, they're low income and are dependent on a social security check for income. And even that is not enough sometimes to really cover everything that they need. Most of the time, it's not enough to cover it. And then, so now here's me, this third generation from, what I've described. Am I going to continue that? Or am I going to be the one to say, okay, no, I'm going to be the one that's going to shift the trajectory of our family in terms of wealth? And so once I started thinking about it like that, I was like, okay, so I got a choice, basically. I got a choice to make. I could continue to swipe my credit card left and right and get the things that I want and need and look really cute on Instagram and Snapchat and all the things, and have all my friends think that I'm so fabulous. And really just continue to rack up debt, really, at the end of the day, and not have a positive net worth, or even maybe a high net worth. Or I can choose the alternate route, which is to smash my debt as aggressively as I possibly can and get on the wealth building train, where I'm actually increasing my net worth and chasing as high a net worth as possible within reason, given my life circumstances. And in doing that, breaking the cycle of poverty. And so for me, I was like, okay, it's a clear choice: look cute on Instagram or break the cycle of poverty. like the weight of generational poverty on my shoulders was like, okay, I'm sorry, there is not enough hashtags in the world to convince me that Instagram would be the right choice here. And that's what really hit me, that it was something bigger than me.
Wow.
Something bigger than me, and the wealth building train. I think we've got a new phrase that hit me hard, Jonathan.
Yeah.
This is amazing. All right, so let's talk about that. So first of all, you mentioned I was reading a lot of books and I realized they're describing me. What books spoke to you in such a way that you took action? There's information everywhere. Information is
Yeah.
ubiquitous, but you took action. What was it that flipped that switch for you?
So the book that's coming to mind is The Millionaire Next Door. And that book was literally mind blowing for me, because what it described, basically what in the book actually really resonated with me, was the interviews. There were tons of interviews with millionaires who actually were not born into a family that would be considered a millionaire family. Like, this was the first generation. They became a millionaire from one generation to the next. So that in itself says, okay, so it's somebody like me who didn't come from wealth, who didn't come from a family with millions of dollars. And somehow they, from one generation to the next, became a millionaire. So what do they do? What are their habits? What is their mindset? And especially when it comes to their finances, how are they spending their money? And so the interviews were like simple questions, like, how much money would you spend on a watch? Or how much do you typically spend on a nice suit? What kind of car do you drive? And for how long do you keep that car? Things like that, right? I was like, okay, they're gonna have some diamond studded watch because millionaires have all the fancy jewelry, all the fancy watch. They're gonna have a fancy car. They're gonna have an expensive, like Armani suit or something like
Because you're
that.
on Instagram. You know what all the millionaires have on Instagram. Look at them. Yeah.
And TV and Instagram and YouTube, all the things, right? If I see another YouTube ad that starts with, I just got another Ferrari and this is my house and my pool, I'm gonna be like, oh my God, like, please, no more of those damn ads. But, for me, the thing was that I started to realize that the questions that were being asked, I was anticipating a certain answer. Like I had these preconceived notions of millionaires, like you said. But once I started looking at the answers, these people were like, I would never spend more than $30, $40 on a watch. Why? Why would I, right? As long as it works and it's and it's good quality, it's gonna last me a long time. I would never spend $400 on a watch. That's ridiculous. I would never lease a car every 2 years just to keep updating it and have the latest car. Like I'm gonna buy a used car that's certified pre-owned, good condition, do my research and drive that thing till the wheels fall off, and then give it to my kid and get another one and that kind of thing. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is not the picture in my mind of a millionaire and how a millionaire would describe their life. And so that is what opened my eyes to the fact that I needed to completely shift my mindset. Like there is no way that I could continue to believe the things I believed about how rich people look and how rich people act and how rich people talk and how rich people dress and blah, blah, blah. Like if I was going to actually be able to have a chance at building wealth and having a healthy relationship with money, then I was going to have to completely wipe my mental slate clean and start with fresh new beliefs and thoughts and ideas about money and how it works.
Yeah, it's amazing. You can really, and I don't know how, I think I read that book when I was pretty young also. And I realized like you can either look wealthy or you can be wealthy, right?
That's right.
For
That's
most
right.
people, unless you make obviously an
Of
insane amount of income, but
course.
right. But like even a $200,000 income can go pretty darn quick if you've
That's
got the
right.
big fancy cars, like you say, the watches, the super expensive house, like it goes quick. And you might make a nice
Very quick.
income, but you might not be wealthy, right?
That's right. That's right. And in that book, he actually has, or I believe there's multiple authors, they actually have a terminology about wealth building. So it's aggressive accumulator of wealth, is AAW. And that was just like in my mind, I was like, wait, what? How can I become an aggressive accumulator of wealth? I want to do
That
that.
calculation
And like,
is tricky. Have you hit it yet?
no. I'm nowhere near there. I'm nowhere near there.
I've run that calculation a couple times. It is intense.
It's intense AF. But like for me, I was just at least that idea that this is something that exists. This is a concept that a lot of people are out there aspiring to achieve. And so, even if I can't hit it, I can try my best, right, to get as close to it as possible, even if that's, so far from it. But I'm working towards it. I'm trying towards it rather than settling for whatever the heck I thought I was supposed to be doing before.
What's so interesting about what you just mentioned there, that calculation, is Thomas Stanley wasn't using the exact same terminology that we're talking about here with savings rate, but he kind of was. He was saying it's not how much you make, it's the percentage that you save. He was putting the emphasis on that. So if you make a ton but have nothing to show for it, or you're saving the same amount that someone that's making a third of what you make could save, great, congratulations, you're still not building wealth. You have figured out a way to make your life cost 4 times as much as this individual, and it's going to make it even harder for you to, build wealth long term. So
Exactly.
in many ways, that reframe, that was the first, before I was really looking at things through the lens of FI and savings rate, my first iteration of that idea was that calculation. We'll have it referenced in the show notes. We don't have the formula here, but basically it was saying it takes a look at like 2 or 3 different things: your age, your actual net worth, and your income. I think those are the 3 factors. And then it gives you a target based on that. And yeah, it's interesting just to see how he was already kind of leaning in that direction maybe 1 to 2 decades ago.
Exactly. That's right.
That is cool. I wonder if you've ever thought back to that first time you read that book, right? You said growing up, money talk was always negative, right? You obviously had gotten into credit card debt, but yet this one book changed everything in your life. Like, what do you think it was? Was it the stories? Was it just realizing that there's another path? Like, we're always looking for that awakening moment. What do you think that was for you, just in the text of this book?
Yeah, I think it was just that this core belief that I had, which is that, money and riches are are directly associated with what you wear, how much you spend on what you wear, the car you drive and how you look, like if you have a Gucci belt, all these ridiculous things I grew up believing, and of course a lot of these things are because of I grew up in the hood, like in this environment where people blow their paycheck on the latest iPhone, even if they're not going to have enough money to keep the lights on in some cases. And so I think, and obviously that's not in all hoods and all communities that are struggling. Like I think that a lot of times that's not the case, but there is a high threshold of that kind of that type of spending where it's like not super financially savvy, but there's this pressure to do what you can because, hey, life is rough and, getting a Gucci belt's going to make you feel better. Go for it, right? And you're going to look really cool and it's going to make you feel like you have achieved something and that you have, you are successful in this, in this social status and financial kind of area, even though you're really not pretty high in terms of finances and social status probably. And so for me, I think that's what people are chasing. So I understand it. But when I believed those things, I never imagined a different route. I never imagined that there was this alternative. And so once I read that book and I heard actual millionaires, like I had never heard an actual millionaire talk. Like, I probably, besides like watching people on TV, never actually sat down to listen to a millionaire answer questions. And let alone somebody who actually became a millionaire from one generation to the next. This is very different from the types of millionaires that kids are seeing on TV and on social media now, which a lot of them were spoon-fed and, just were born into wealth. And so really watching somebody sit down and answer questions that talk about how they have, strategically made money decisions with a very clear goal in mind. Like I was like, oh, that's what I need to be doing clearly. And so I think it just took me through to my core and just shook me because everything that I believed was being completely turned around and flipped on its head. And for me, that was a little bit jarring. And I think for me, it was kind of like an awakening of like, oh my goodness, what else out there is there that is the total opposite of what I've believed my whole life? And that is a legitimate and valid way to live your life. Like now I want to explore all these things. And so it just really opened my mind a lot more than I think even 4 years of college did for me.
You said what else is actually a great kind of setup for this next bit, because I know when we were talking offline, you mentioned that you had just hit Coast Fi. Now, Fi is something that wasn't in your purview, wasn't in your worldview,
Right.
5, 6, 7 years ago. And now you've hit this incredible number as a result of this awakening. Talk to us about the introduction of this idea of financial independence and like what it meant when you had this realization that this is attainable for you, what it did to the next steps and the actions that you took from there.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that I started doing was immediately maximizing everything that I was doing with investments. So before I would just put whatever I could into as a teacher, I had a 403b. I would just put, 7% into my 403b. And I thought, oh, great. Okay, I'm investing. I'm good. I'm doing something besides Social Security, for my retirement. But once I started realizing like there's more that I got to do, I started to say, okay, how can I prioritize maximizing every tax efficient investment vehicle before I pay my rent? And that's like that right there is nuts because in my experience growing up, the first thing you need to pay is your rent. You don't want to be evicted. You don't want to be kicked out of your house. The first priority is rent and food on the table for your kids. And so changing that mindset and saying, nope, the first priority is not going to be my food, is not going to be my rent. How nutty does that sound?
Sounds super nutty even to me right now. Like I'm interested to hear you validate that. Like, kind of
I mean, but if I needed to, I could live in a van. Do you know what I mean? Like just getting to a point where you literally are willing to do, and it's not, I mean, there's so many people that, hashtag van life is a thing, right? Like glamorize these vans and they live in these vans. And it's like, if you can do that for 2 years, how much money you would save on rent and like paying a bank, a mortgage, right? So, but again, these are things I had never in my mind imagined that somebody would willingly live in a van, if they weren't homeless. And so I just, again, talking about these ideas and these concepts that are totally foreign to me growing up, it just expanded my mind to like, okay, well, you know what? If you couldn't do rent and with maximizing all of your tax efficient retirement accounts, what would you have to do? You would have to figure out what's cheaper than rent, right? So again, I think like I was willing to challenge myself in ways where I was like never even at that level of thinking before, right? So now I'm like, okay, I'm going to completely max out my Roth IRA every single year. That was my first priority before my 403b. Because what I learned about 403bs is that the 403b space, there's not a lot of regulation in that space. So unlike a 401k, there's a lot of regulation in terms of 401ks and what they can, offer you and what your employer has to do. Versus with the 403b, it's like a free for all. It's basically like the best salesman comes into your school or saleswoman comes into your school and convinces you to use their 403b plan rather than some, competitors' 403b plan. And yet the hidden fees are, out of this world. And so for me, I was like, okay, the way that I learned about 403bs and investing in general for retirement taught me that my first priority should be my Roth IRA. So I wanted to make sure I could do 5,500 at that time, now 6,000 every year. So that's immediately $500 a month has to come off my paycheck before I pay my rent. All right, so now I'm earning $500 less. Okay, let's keep going, right? Like that was the kind of thinking that I shifted to. And so then the same thing went for my job. Once I moved from teaching to other jobs, I was offered a 401k instead of a 403b. So 401ks oftentimes come with a match, which is not very likely for a 403b. And so for a 401k, I was like, okay, now I got this account. Now I want to get that match. So Roth IRA is fully funded. Now I want to invest as much as I can in my 401k to qualify for that company match. And so if that's 5%, if that's 10%, or whatever it is, I'm going to look at those details in my retirement plan and put whatever I got to put in there to get the match. So those were sort of like the complete changes to the way that I was thinking about my money plan and my budget. And then whatever was left after I scraped that amount off the top, that's the monthly spending that I could actually do or use to pay for rent and food and bills and all that kind of stuff. So pretty much what happened was my fund money, what I call fund money, was completely, reduced. So like I used to spend almost $1,000 just like concerts, movies, fun, brunch, dinner, hanging out. And now I give myself maybe like $300-400 a month, and that's it. And for me, that's even, I think a lot of people probably still can't get to the point where they can freely spend $300 a month on whatever they want. But I've worked to be able to do that. And I think even people that earn more than me or earned more than I was when I was a teacher still spend more than $300 a month on fun money. So that was a big shift for me.
Yeah, I love that really gritty way of looking at paying yourself first, right? I mean, that come hell or high water, you were paying yourself first. And like you said, you can always figure it out from there, right? Like if you had to get a less expensive apartment or whatever it may be, but you prioritized saving, right? And again, breaking this cycle. So I'm curious, just real quick, you were so savvy.
Well, I'm just the type of person who's like hungry for knowledge. And I think like the level of like relentlessness that I have when I'm going to get answers, and I think it comes from being in a rigorous college environment where you have to write this paper about this topic and you have to type a 35-page paper in a week, and you don't know anything about this topic right now, or you just know the basics. You better start reading. You better start watching videos. You better turn on the TV, put on a podcast, all at the same time. Just get all the knowledge. Some people even say if you listen to a podcast while you're sleeping, the knowledge will go, right? Like, you better be trying all of that because you have a very little bit of time and a lot to learn. And then you have to produce a result. And so for me, I really think like that. I'm like, you know what? I want to start investing within 90 days. So I have to produce a result in 90 days. That means that from now to 90 days, I better learn everything that I can to make the best decision about my investments. So for me, that meant that I was listening to podcasts and audiobooks on 2x speed. I was watching YouTube videos on like 1.5x speed, taking note, right? Like reading every book I could possibly get my hands on. And I've literally read them all. Like I'm obsessed. And so I think that level of obsession and like, I'm not going to compromise. I want to know everything that I feel, because you know what it is? I truly felt like it was an injustice. And that anger in me that this is not just. Like, I grew up in a community that's never heard of this stuff. My family never heard of this stuff. My teachers never taught it to me. I went to an Ivy League school and they never taught it to me. Why wasn't this taught to me? This is an injustice. And so because of that, like, anger started to stir up in me, and I used that anger to fuel me to teach it to myself, because I can't depend on anybody to teach it to me. Obviously, I would have learned it at this point if that were the case. So now I got nobody but me to teach this stuff to me. So I better figure it out And even if it's confusing, I'm gonna Google every word that I've never heard of that I don't know, even if that means I have to stop reading every 2 minutes. I'm gonna do it because I need to understand what's going on with my money, and I wanna be an agent of change for myself, and I wanna also be as informed as possible, which means I can't just, like, my old mentality, or my former mentality was that I would sit down and ask somebody. Let me go to an expert and let me ask them, hey, why don't you tell me what I should do? And then I'm gonna take their advice. I no longer believe that that is a good strategy for solving your problems. You can hear what an expert has to say, sure, but then you need to go do your own research because that expert has something fueling them and, some motivation for why they're saying what they're saying to you, and every expert you have to ask yourself, like, what's in it for them? Why are they telling me this advice? And so that is very much so in the world of investing. That's the case. Every single person that's giving you investment advice, you want to find out, why are they giving you that advice? What's the advice they're giving you? Why? And who's it coming from, right? If they're a fiduciary financial advisor, great. Then they have an obligation to tell you what's best for you based on your goals. But if there's some fee-based, or fee, whatever, you want to make sure that that's not the case. You want to make sure you're listening to somebody who has no ulterior motives. They're not getting some kickback. They're not getting commission. They're not getting a free vacation if they hit this much level of sales for this mutual fund. Like, that to me it felt so dirty and so wrong. And I think, again, all that like anger is what fueled me.
I love it. Your anger is powerful.
Right.
I think what's incredible about this is you went from, it's the injustice. Why did nobody teach me this in school? To, in all my schools at all levels, to I'm going to solve this for myself, to I'm going to solve generational poverty. I'm going to break the cycle of generational poverty, to, in my late 20s and my early 30s, I've reached Coast Fi. And I'd love for you to define that term for people, because I think it's you standing at the top of that Philadelphia stair steps, a la Rocky, and just doing that dance. It's like, this is it. This is the culmination. Fi is great, but this is the culmination of generational poverty being broken. So I'd love for you to break that down for our audience and tell us what that means and practically, and then what it means for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, when you do any type of fire, your goal is to really try to challenge I am going to wait until I turn this age, and then I'm going to retire at the age I'm supposed to with X amount of money. And I think, challenging just what retirement means and when you're supposed to retire is the basis, the premise of this, right? And then so when it comes to Coast Fi, it's a specific type of challenging, typical retirement notions with I'm actually going to hit a point where I have invested enough money that even if I never invest another dollar again, I will still be a millionaire when I turn 65, the quote unquote retirement age, right? And so for me, that means that I need to have aggressively invested for the past 5 years, 6 years, which I have been, so that I could hit more close to $250,000. So that was my big goal. I haven't hit 250 right just yet, but I'm about to, and I'm on track for December of 2020. And I think that for me, it basically means that now I don't have to worry about retiring with dignity. Like, when I look at my dad who's 70 years old, I'm like, dang it. I really wish that I was in a position right now where I could make sure that my dad retired with dignity. But he started way too late. He started saving money just a couple years ago when he realized that he didn't have enough to retire. And working the types of jobs that he worked as an immigrant with limited English speaking skills, he was offered jobs like cleaning jobs and, cooking in the back of the kitchen and, washing dishes, making pastries, driving a taxi cab, custodial work. So these are the types of jobs that are not your formal 9-to-5 at a desk with a 401k. So my dad never had that. So for me, I feel like I have to take advantage of my 401k. I have to take advantage of the Roth IRA. It's something my dad never had an opportunity to invest in. So by just putting so much money in there, as much as I could for the past couple years, now, even if I never invest again, I'm still good. I will be on track to hit $1 million in my retirement accounts cumulatively by the time that I turn 65, which is really great, because now I know that I can sleep at night knowing that all I have to do is cover the basics of my day-to-day spending and monthly living, and then I'm good.
I want to make sure people hear this, because you put emphasis on it, but it's basically if I never save another dollar again, if suddenly I decide I'm not angry, everything's okay, I'm going to go back to my old Instagram habits and just spend everything I make. Is there any universe in which this individual that we're talking to right now isn't going to keep getting better, isn't going to keep figuring out how to optimize the equation further? The reality is, as a result of the decisions that you made up to this point and are continuing to make, you have locked in a multi-million dollar future for yourself. You are the millionaire next door.
Yes. I love that. I love that. That's right.
Hey, I wanted to ask you, you said agent of change, and that phrase really stuck out to me. So you said at first you wanted to be an agent of change for yourself, right? Clearly, that's where it has to start. But obviously it's gone farther than that, right? This ultimately led to your YouTube channel, which is successful. But where did that agent of change go directly after it was for yourself? Like, did you start talking to family, to friends? Like, where did you go for that next step?
Yeah, naturally it was friends and family, but I think people are going to hear you when they have personally hit that point where they're ready to hear you. And my family and friends weren't there yet. So they were just like, oh my goodness, shut up. We don't want to hear you talk more about investing and saving money and the stock market and index funds. We don't care. Like, and I was like, okay, so if I can't stop talking about this stuff, I need to find an outlet where I can talk about it and people will want to hear what I have to say because my family is just not feeling it. And so for me, that was YouTube. I just started the YouTube platform because I wanted to share and I wanted to talk. And I figured somebody else is going to come on, watch this video and comment, I love this. This is index funds nerding me out too. Like, and so I figured that would be a good way to kind of participate and even create just my own community around personal finance. But it actually led to me actually thinking deeper. I was a classroom teacher and I'm like, okay, so here's this cycle, a different cycle of poverty. A different cycle of there's a lack of something, right? And it's just going to continue, right? From one generation to the next was my teachers, they never learned about personal finance in school. I sat in the classroom with them. They never taught me about money or personal finance. Now I'm a teacher and I spend my time teaching kids about all kinds of things. Reading, writing, phonics, phonemic awareness, grammar, spelling. We do all kinds of quizzes about social studies and where the different continents are and all the different countries in the world and all this stuff. And nowhere in the curriculum do students learn about money, at least not in New York where I live. So I was so frustrated by that. I'm like, okay, well, I figured out this cycle that I'm ready to smash with my personal finances. But what about the education, the educational component, financial literacy? That is also lacking in being passed on from generation to generation. And so that for me was like, I need to figure out a way to change that. And so when I found out about this organization called NextGen Personal Finance, they reached out to me. They wanted me to come on their podcast where they talk to teachers about money and personal finance so that the teachers actually have the knowledge and skills to then teach it in the classroom, whether that's high school or middle school. And so I was like, wow, oh my goodness, you guys are actually doing this work that I really want to do. And so why go off and create something new when I can, participate in the work that you all are already doing? And so the mission actually of the organization, and I've formerly been on staff for 2 years now, where I've been working full time there doing educational outreach. And so the mission is to make sure that by the year 2030, every single student in high school in the United States will have on their class schedule a full semester of personal finance before they graduate. So that is huge because it means that the next generation of Americans, really, because when we're talking about the public school system in America, we're talking about the next generation of Americans. That students going to school in the next generation are not going to be able to say, man, that's a class I wish I had. I wish instead of drawing, parabolas, that I was learning how to file my taxes, that I was understanding the difference between a traditional savings account and an online savings account. That, that these things that I'm going to need to be able to use every day in my life once I start making money are actually taught in the classroom. And so that's actually what I feel like I gravitated towards because of my formal training in teaching, having my master's in education, that kind of thing. But also because that's where I found that I could make the most impact. I could talk on and on and on about this, but I guess the last thing I'll say is I realized okay, I have this platform, I have Miss Be Helpful. I love posting videos about money. I love talking about this stuff. But if I become like a financial coach or like a financial speaker, which I do still want to kind of do, but if that's the only thing that I'm focusing my time and energy on, then I'm going to be limited to the individual number of hourly sessions I can provide. How many hourly sessions can I really provide, right? How many coaching sessions can I really facilitate? I'm just one person. But if we can create change in the educational system by training thousands of teachers who then train hundreds of students, we're talking about completely reforming the way students are learning in schools. And that is the kind of change I'm after. Not counting how many clients I can book in a month. That's not, I mean, yeah, great. I mean, if you're doing that work, keep doing that work. If you love it, I'm not knocking it. But for me, I was looking for something bigger.
It's pretty cool. You can see your passion for this. It seems like there's total alignment, and it looks like you're having an impact at scale. I was just looking at your website, missbehelpful.com, and it looks like to date, Yanelli, you've led over 200 virtual webinars for private companies, nonprofits, high schools, colleges, and universities. So, your hourly time is reaching a bunch of people. You've done some incredible events and talks that you've given at various conferences around the country. And between, the personal brand that you build and the great work that you're doing with NextGen, it just seems like the future is wide open. And I know personally, like it's incentive alignment. That's exactly what we're hoping to see is to see financial literacy spread across the country and across the globe. So I am just so excited that you came on the show to share a little bit about your backstory, your why of financial independence, and your why of financial literacy. And if people are listening to this and they want to connect with you, connect with the content that you've made, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so I mean, my primary form of sharing content is on YouTube. I post a video weekly, youtube.com/Miss Be Helpful, MISSBE Helpful. And then you can also follow me on Instagram. I generally try to make a day a week where I go through my DMs, but
it's not your traditional Instagram feed.
No, I mean, you know what it is too? Like after like 10,000 followers, like you get so many DMs, it's like, okay, this is like a full-time job, just responding to DMs. But definitely shoot me a DM because I do set aside a day a week to go through and see if there are really like, juicy questions that I feel like I wish I had, somebody send me a resource about that. Obviously, I'm not giving financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor, but I do share educational resources. I'll be like, you need to check out this book or you need to read this article. So that's the type of stuff that I share.
Awesome. Yaneli, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been fantastic.
Thank you.
Wow, everyone. What an incredible story. And it's just amazing to see, we made this commitment to you a year ago that this is not about a very stereotypical individual and a very stereotypical career, following a very stereotypical path. This is what we want for everybody. This is the information that everybody needs. And the longer we do this as a community, the longer we lean into finding these stories and highlighting these stories, we realize that it's already happening. Change is already happening. This is for everybody. You might have to work through different obstacles, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't work through it and that you shouldn't do it. Get started. Please just get started. And if you're interested in what resources we can offer to help you on this path, let me encourage you, just go to choosify.com/start. We've put everything there for you to make it very easy for you to on-ramp to your own path to financial independence today. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.